Hi, I'm Rahel Philipose and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. In this episode, we talk about a high-level meet of police officers. We also give you an update on a massive rally against love jihad in Mumbai. But first, we talk about the crash of two fighter jets.
Two Indian Air Force fighter jets have crashed in Madhya Pradesh during a training exercise.
Indian Air Force has confirmed that two pilots have been rescued, while one pilot is reported to have died.
On Saturday, during a training exercise, two Indian Air Force fighter jets crashed, killing one pilot. A preliminary analysis of crash reports suggests that there was a mid-air collision between the two jets. But a court of inquiry has been set up to ascertain the cause of the crash. The Indian Express's Amrita Nayak Dutta joins us in this segment to talk about the incident, its possible causes, and whether these crashes are common occurrences in the Air Force. So Amrita, to start with, can you talk about what happened on Saturday?
Yes. So on Saturday, two aircraft of the Indian Air Force, they crashed. One was a Mirage 2000 fighter and the other was a Sukhoi 30. Both the aircraft took off from Gwalior Air Base and they crashed. The wreckage of one of the aircraft was found in Morena, that is in Madhya Pradesh, and the other was found in Bharatpur, that's in a neighboring Rajasthan. So what happened was, we don't know exactly how the crash took place. Court of inquiry has been set up to ascertain the exact reason for the crash. But having said that, it is understood that there could have been a mid-air collision, but again, that cannot be established for sure on what led to the crash. The Mirage pilot, Wing Commander Sarathi, he was killed in the crash. However, the Sukhoi pilots, there were two pilots in it, and both of them managed to eject before their flight crashed in Bharatpur. So this is exactly what happened.
So you mentioned a court of inquiry has been set up to investigate the causes of the crash. But there's already some speculation, right, of what might have happened. So can you talk to us about that?
So a fighter aircraft is a very complex machine. It can crash because of a variety of reasons. It could be a bird hit, it could be an engine failure, it could be some technical glitch. But in this latest incident, the incident on Saturday which took place, two aircraft took off from the same place. They were most likely in a combat exercise that they were doing. They more or less crashed around the same time in the same vicinity, very close to each other. So that gives the impression, experts, they say that it could have been some sort of a collision. May not be a head-on collision, but some sort of a collision that happened mid-air. But again, the IF has categorically said that only the court of inquiry will be able to establish what is the real reason. There has been no official word on what led to it.
Okay, and Amrita, how common are these crashes?
If you look at the history of Air Force, there has been several crashes of fighter jets. You would know that MiG-21 is one of the aircraft which has seen a lot of crashes. There has been other crashes as well. However, if you talk about Mirage 2000, it has got an extremely good safety record. There has been very less crashes from the time it has been inducted. There would have been hardly 5 crashes since 2010, which is a very good flight safety record when you compare it to the amount of flying that the aircraft does. And when you talk about Sukhois, it has again seen about 10 accidents since 2010. So both these aircraft had a good flight safety record. So it's not very common. But then MiG-21s, they have seen a lot of crashes. There have been crashes of the other fighter aircraft which is there in the Indian Air Force. It's not something which is very unusual. That's the reason why this aircraft undergo heavy maintenance and a lot of checks are done before every sortie that is flown on these fighter aircraft.
Right. And Amrita, you spoke to many experts and veterans after the incident. And while the reason for the latest crash is not known, the experts did talk about what generally causes mid-air collisions. So could you tell us what they said?
We spoke to a variety of experts to understand why crashes take place, not just a regular crash. A regular crash could be because of many reasons. It could be a plane engine failure. But why something like a mid-air collision would take place? Mid-air collisions is not very common in the Indian Air Force. There have been incidents. Anchit Gupta, who is an aviation historian, he told us yesterday that 62 aircraft have been lost so far to mid-air collisions in the Indian military in the last 7 decades, including 11 MiG-21s. And that's not a very high figure when you compare it to the amount of flying that the Indian Air Force does. So when you talk about mid-air collisions, it is not very frequent. It is not too common. And mid-air collisions usually take place, when you are doing some sort of aerobatics, or you're sort of doing some sort of close combat flying, or you are engaged in an exercise where you are one aircraft and you're trying to target another simulated enemy aircraft. So a lot of, in such circumstances, when the Air Force, when the fighter jets are exercising so closely, when they are meant to target or attack each other as part of the training mission that they're trying. So in such situations, at times, even a minute error can cause an accident. So if it was a mid-air collision, we do not know for sure, but if it was one, this could have been one of the reasons.
All right. And Amrita, these crashes, are they common in civil aviation as well?
If you talk about a plane air crash, yes, we have seen there have been crashes of civil aircraft also. However, when you talk about fighter aircraft, the chances are far more, but just because of the complexity of the machine involved. So crashes is one thing. But if you talk about mid-air collisions, it's not common in civil aviation because there are very clear-cut guidelines and SOPs which are set. Two aircraft do not fly so close to each other. But when you're doing combat flying, the fighter jets, they are meant to be very close to each other. They're meant to target each other. They're meant to shoot each other down. And that's part of a training exercise. And in an institute like TACD, where the top guns of the Air Force are trained, they do very, very complex maneuvers and they do very complex amount of combat flying. And as a result, I wouldn't say this is common or this is routine because a lot of checks and a lot of practices and training happens before that. But this would be more common in combat flying as compared to a civil aircraft. Because the last such collision, a mid-air collision in the civilian airspace that took place was the Charki Dadri case that involved a Kazakh aircraft and a Saudi Arabia aircraft, which took place in 1996, killing 349 people.
And next we talk about a conference of high-level police personnel. In a recent conference of Director Generals and Inspector Generals of Police, the officers flagged multiple issues, including the role of Islamists and Hindutva organizations in contributing to the growing radicalization in the country. In the conference, which was attended by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Union Home Minister Amit Shah, police officers came up with papers and ideas on how to address this growing radicalization. However, after the conference ended, all the submitted papers were removed from the meet's website. The Indian Express's Deeptiman Tiwary joins us in this segment to talk about the meet and the ideas shared by the police officers. Okay, so Deeptiman, to start with, what is a DGP meet and how important is it?
You see, the DG conference or the DGP IGP's meet is organized at the national level every year. This is basically a platform for all state police chiefs and senior officials, as well as those from the central police organizations, to exchange best practices and to come on a platform to discuss the challenges facing law and order and security of the country. This is a very important meet because it is attended both by the Union Home Minister and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Earlier also, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh used to attend these events. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has actually laid a great emphasis on these conferences because he believes that exchange of best practices will improve policing across the country, as well as getting views and ideas from, different parts of the country, from police officers from different states and police organizations will help not only in coordination among central and state agencies, but also overall improve the security situation in the country.
Okay, and when you say exchange of best practices, what does it mean in the context of this conference?
Exchange of best practices is basically a state police force may have come up with a new idea which has been very successful in dealing with a particular kind of crime or in dealing with some terrorism or radicalization or anything which others can adopt. And because it has brought good results, or people can pick good things out of that idea and its implementation and use it. That's what sharing of best practices is across any stream of administration. That's what sharing of best practices is about. See, these DG conferences are actually not aimed at, solving some case or a particular problem. They're basically there to influence larger policy. And when larger policies are reshaped, they have an impact in the long run, not in the short term.
Right. And in this year's conference, radicalization was an important topic, and certain outfits were flagged while speaking about radicalization. So, are these topics decided beforehand?
Okay, so the conference decides on certain topics which are going to be discussed. So there may be a dozen topics or 20 topics on which all police officers well in advance who are going to be participating in the DG's conference are supposed to, prepare presentations, do their research work, prepare notes, papers, and those are submitted beforehand to the government and for the conference. And many of these reports, and they can run into every topic can have more than a dozen research papers and reports from different police officers across the country. And these come up for discussions in the conference when the Home Minister and the Prime Minister are sitting.
Okay. And Deeptiman, while discussing radicalization in the country, there were papers which pointed out certain ideologies or organizations as possible causes. Can you tell us briefly what these papers say?
So for this, more than a dozen research papers were submitted from across the country, from the northeast to the west, to the north, to the southern states. Many senior officers and SP rank officers had sent research papers. Some of these research papers, while this was supposed to be almost everybody talked about Islamic radicalization in the country, a large number of papers also discussed radicalization of certain Hindutva organizations. And in fact, one particular paper specifically named VHP, Bajrang Dal and Hindu Sena as radical organizations. Many papers flagged Hindutva organizations and their activities such as beef lynching, ghar vapsi, or this aggressive expression of Hindutva assertion on a daily basis, or demeaning of other religions as factors which were leading to Islamic radicalization. So these were some very, very important points that were raised in the recently concluded DG's conference. In fact, some of the papers actually equated these Hindutva organizations with organizations such as Jamaat-e-Islami, Jamiyat-e-Ahle Hadith, and say PFI, Popular Front of India. So yes, as much as concerns for Islamic radicalization and terrorism were raised, so were concerns about alleged counterpolarization perpetrated by Hindutva organizations was also discussed.
And did the papers offer any solution to the problems raised in the first place?
Yes, of course. Most papers have said that one of the most important things in a democracy for radicalization not to take shape is not just policing measures of, saying having an intelligence grade or having a social media monitoring mechanism or punishing people for their radical activities. They said beyond this, what was important was to give people a platform where people could vent their anger, because such platforms or discuss and debate, even if those ideas were not necessarily palatable to the establishment, because they believe that sections which are have a perception of being oppressed or suffering injustice, if they're able to vent their anger through platforms, through political engagement or through social engagement or in any other manner through debates or whatever, it works as a safety valve in a democracy where people can express anger, express dissent, and at least have a feeling of being heard or have a feeling of at least participation in the democratic process. And such things, when they happen, most of the people will not be attracted towards radicalism, because radicalism in many ways is also a shutting of doors of democratic process, which is what leads to people to radicalization.
Okay, and were there more solutions suggested by the officers?
Some officers have argued that there should be reservation for Muslims in educational institutions and jobs, because it is important to uplift their both educational and economic status, because these two factors are also among those which lead to radicalization, which means very poor education or being socio-economically deprived. Such deprivation also leads to radicalization. Then, of course, there are these policing solutions, such as having strong intelligence grade, having better relationship, police and community relationship, where community can be engaged, civil society can be engaged into spotting radical individuals and to de-radicalize them, or to diffuse situations which can lead to radicalization. Then there have been issues such as disproportionate use of security establishment and minimal role of scholars and psychologists and civil society, which have been raised. Then missing synergy between online and offline efforts of police in dealing with radicalization, and lack of curative policies, where when somebody is radicalized, and how do you reform that person? So many have argued that there are no coherent policies to deal with that. Then some have also flagged framework flaws. And one paper has referred basically to Germany and its long-standing Exit Deutschland program, which is aimed at reforming neo-Nazi radicals. So again, referring to far-right elements in the country, which also need to be dealt with. Similarly, issues of Islamophobia were raised, like in Britain, how media basically portrayed actions of a particular community made Muslims look more threatening than they actually were. And so there was some sort of Islamophobia, which leads to isolation of people, and that isolation can lead to radicalization. So these are the kind of solutions which are offered.
And Deeptiman, there was another development this year. All the papers presented at the conference were then deleted from the Meet website, right? So does that happen every year, or was this an exception?
Okay, one thing very clear about this government is that this government is very sensitive about information that even may be remotely critical of the government. So generally we have seen a trend in the government that whenever there is any paper, any data, anything which is, remotely critical of the government, it just disappears. So this is not something surprising. I remember doing a story during the pandemic about BPR&D research paper flagging how fake news was used to demonize Muslims during the pandemic. And the moment the Indian Express did that story, that research paper was removed from the BPR&D website. Similarly, we have done stories of NCRB deciding to collect data on lynchings, and after we did the story and NCRB even collected that data was never published, and NCRB argued that since lynching is not recognized as a separate offense under the IPC, so it is not being published, which is very strange, because NCRB collects data on how many people die every year by lightning, but there is no separate IPC section for death by lightning. But yes, so, if the government does not want to give a data, it does not want to give a data. It's its prerogative. And that is why probably these were removed, because first there were reports on the Sino-Indian border, where it was suggested that some 26 patrolling points are not accessible to India anymore. So first that, and then a couple of more reports which were critical of the government. After that, probably the government decided that they don't need to be in public domain.
And in the end, we give you an update about a massive rally against love jihad in Mumbai. Activists of right-wing organizations took out a massive rally in Mumbai on Sunday against love jihad, with the demand to bring in anti-conversion laws and a crackdown on land grabbing in the name of religion. The Hindu Jan Akrosh Morcha, organized by Sakal Hindu Samaj, saw the participation of leaders and workers of right-wing outfits such as the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh or the RSS, the Bajrang Dal and the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. The rally began from Shivaji Park in Dadar and culminated at Kamgar Maidan in Parel, covering a distance of more than 4 kilometers. Leaders and MLAs of the Bharatiya Janata Party and Chief Minister Eknath Shinde's Balasaheb Banchi Shiv Sena also participated in the rally. The police was deployed along the route of the march to prevent any untoward incident. Love jihad is a term often used by right-wing activists to allege a ploy by Muslim men to lure Hindu women into religious conversion through marriage. Maharashtra Deputy Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis had said last year that the government would study laws on love jihad framed by other states and take an appropriate decision. He had also spoken about a feeling in the legislature regarding the Shraddha Walkar case that instances of love jihad are seen at a larger scale in the state. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was hosted by me, Rahel Philipose, and written and produced by Utsa Sarmin with the help of Anwiti Singh. It was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.